Nobody's a standing prayer. Okay. We never know in life when we are going to be called upon to speak, when we are required to be the voice of one crying in the wilderness, or the voice of comfort, or the voice of confession. And so we have 17 opportunities to be a leader. And everyone else will respond to this prayer. So as you find your voice wherever you are, as a leader, please speak the first petition and we will answer. The making is leader of peace. To recognize its sugar when the people need it most. Many peoples of the world recognize the tree as a symbol of peace and strength. With one mind, we greet and thank the tree life. Now our minds are one.
We gather our minds together to send our greetings and thanks to all the beautiful animal life who walk about with us. They have many things to teach us as people.
We are grateful that they continue to share their lives with us and hope that it will always be so. Let us put our minds together as one and send thanks to the animals. Now our minds are one. Each morning they greet the day, and with their songs remind us to enjoy and appreciate life. The eagle was chosen to be their leader and to watch over the world. To all the birds, from the smallest to the largest, we send our joyful greetings and thanks. Now our minds are one.
Your faith comes known as the four winds. You hear the voices of the moving air, and the precious purified air.
They help us bring the change of seasons. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the four winds. Now our minds are one.
Now we turn to the west, where our grandfathers, the thunder begins live.
With lightning and thundering voices, they break with them the water that renews life. We bring our minds together as one to send greetings and thanks to our grandfathers, the thunderers.
We now send greetings and thanks to our eldest brother, the sun.
Each day without fail, he travels the sky from east to west, bringing the light of the new day. He is the source of all fires and life. We have now arrived at the place where we end our words.
Be seated. Welcome this morning to our gathering at First Methodist Church in Pittsfield. You who come from many traditions, many churches, synagogues, and other faiths, we're glad you're here this morning. We're very blessed. We also wish to give thanks to the First Nations on whose homeland we are now standing. They have been keepers of this land. They are still keepers of this land. Let us honor them as we move forward today. The restrooms. Men, over there, through the doors to the left. Women, over there, to the doors. Excuse me, you're to the right. To the right, over here. And then you take a left and you'll see it. On level 4, if you go to the elevator, go that direction and up. On level 4, you'll find 2 more bathrooms. You're welcome to do those. You're welcome to bring coffee or water, whatever, into the sanctuary to be comfortable during this time. And so I'm going to turn this over to Ingrid, who has prepared this time of ceremony and gathering for us.
I want to introduce folks who are participating in the ceremony this morning, and I'm going to start at the end and work my way forward. The last thing that you will hear will be music being played under the leadership of Joshua Burns Sprague. You also heard him at the beginning when you walked in, so we thank Josh for providing the support of the music here. Ann Woods is going to be our Buddhist representative who will close off the service for us. The African choir are too many to name, but I just want to mention Ishmael Kranze, who is a leader for our African brothers and sisters here and a great communicator gathering everybody together. Our guest of honor this morning is Larry Spotted Crow Mann, who is the Nipmuc education cultural bringer, as well as drum keeper. We are beyond honored that you are here with us this morning. Thank you so much. We also have representative from the AME Zion Church, Price Memorial, Connie Harris, who is here going to lead prayers this morning along with Thomas Senni. John Hamilton is going to be the voice of Chief Arval Looking Horse, and we are grateful that he and other folks from the First Congregational Church are here. And it is this evening the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. So we are blessed to have our sister Myrna Hammerling from Knesset Israel, who will speak along with Joel Huntington from South Church and who will offer a lamentation. Dande Dean from BIO, the Berkshire Interfaith Organizing, is going to greet you in a moment and invite you to share the peace, and I can think of no one more fitting to do that peace work than Dande. You've already heard from Ralph welcoming you here. Way back in Park Square, we were honored with the presence of Jeannie Lauren, who is a wonderful Qigong and Tai Chi and yoga teacher, so we thank her as well. So those are some of our neighbors who are gathered together this morning. And having said that, I will invite Dande to come forward. And we can then greet each other, perhaps by name. Okay. Oops. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Ingrid. Hi, everyone. I'm Dande. The words that we will say together, and hopefully that will be up there in a moment, are words that I'm most familiar with on Friday evenings when I attend Shabbat at Temple Anshe Amanim. And they're words I'm most familiar with in Hebrew, but we will see them today in English. To me, they just represent this idea that although it's really important to have your own individual relationship with whatever spiritual practice you try to embody and endorse, that we are always in community, both in faith spaces and in the world, and to remember that we sit shoulder to shoulder with one another, and that every person has something unique to offer. So we will say together, how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity. Blessed is the one within the many. Blessed are the many who make one. And now I invite you to turn to your neighbors and exchange a sign of peace. I know different people have different ways of doing it. It can be a handshake, a smile, a pat on the shoulder, whatever helps you feel like you can acknowledge the other person and be seen in return.
Great flank as always. Peace be with you. 2, 3, 4.
Hashkivenu Hashem Elecha V'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem Alas, she sits in danger, earth, home to multitudes, like a beloved deep in distress. Blue ocean, source of life, endangered and imprisoned. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her shorelines wet with tears. Of all her friends, none to comfort her. All her allies have betrayed her. Checker spot butterflies flee their homes. Polar bears can find no rest because our greed has heated earth.
Whole communities destroyed to pursue offshore oil. Lives and dreams have been narrowed. Coastlines mourn for families, lost homes and livelihoods. Barrier islands lament, desolate. Wetlands sigh without their songbirds. Estuaries grieve. The sea is embittered. Earth's children, now her enemies, despite destruction, we sleep at ease. The breath of life grieves our abundant transgressions, infants of every species, captive to our conceit.
Hashkivenu Hashem Elecha V'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kakedem.
Let us return, help us repent. You who breathe all life, breathe us, breathe us, breathe us into a new path. Help us, help us, help us turn to a new way of living. Make new our world of life intertwining. Splendor, beauty, joy in our love for each life form.
Gone from Appalachia, her mountaintop glory, women, mined by Massey Energy Company without compassion, children sick from air and water, stumble weak before King Coal. All that was precious in the days of our youth, earth recalls in woe and sorrow. Her creatures died with none to help them. At the hands of Exxon, now BP, world leaders shrug and look on helpless. We have sinned greatly. So are ailing.
Men, our people who respected life have come to defile it. We have stripped earth naked, she shrinks back. Oily waves slap the sand like a soiled hem. We were heedless of the cost of our appetite. We have sunk appallingly. There is no comfort. See, breath of life, this misery, how our avarice jeers. Greed has laid hands on all dear to us. Your sanctuary plundered by multinationals, full of contempt for your holy community. The earth's poor cry out as they search for nourishment. Indigenous communities trade resources for food to keep themselves alive.
Hashkivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kakedem.
Let us return. Help us repent. You who breathe all life, breathe us, breathe us, breathe us into a new path. Help us, help us, help us turn to a new way of living. Make new our world of life intertwining, splendor, beauty, joy for each other, each life form.
Look, O breath of life, and behold, what gluttons we have become. Will we heed this warning? We who live as if unscathed, Will we truly look and know this agony as our own? We are afflicted by angry consequence. The elements push back against their abuse. Forest fires reach down and spread like fury. Sprawl and refuse trap our spirits. Great storms hurl lives backwards, upside down. Survivors are left forlorn in constant misery. For these things do we weep. Our eyes flow with tears. How far from us is any comfort? The possibility of change that might revive our earth? The children are forlorn, for their future is bleak, unless we act with speed and wisdom.
Men, alas, humanity in our reckless living has brought shame over all. Can we remember the holiness of your creation, your footstool, green and fertile? We have razed woodlands to the ground, profaned the kingdom of earth and all its creatures. In arrogance, we slash the mighty redwoods. Will we cease hiding our power from ourselves and befriend our earth? How can we wrestle with God and bring justice to others if we don't quench the flaming fires and turn back from endless consumption? Egrets and brown pelicans languish in salt marshes. From the depths, corals cry out. Where are the fish? Where are the clean waters? Languishing, battle-wounded in the wetlands, life runs out in ocean's bosom.
Hashivenu Hashem Elecha Vishnashuva Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kakedem.
Let us return. Help us repent. You who breathe all life, breathe us, breathe us, breathe us into a new path. Help us, help us, help us turn to a new way of living. Make new our world of life intertwining, splendor, beauty, joy, and our love for each life form. Lead us on a new path to Eden. Teach us self-restraint in the very midst of abundance. We are here to honor boundaries, not to devour all. Open our eyes to see in each creature, tree, ocean, mountain, the presence of the One.
I'm going to be reading the testimony of Chief Arvel Lookinghorse, who I believe is going to be up on the screen shortly. So please remember that I am but a vessel here this morning for his words. Haukola, hello friend. I'm honored to greet you. I stand humbly before you, Chief Arvel Lookingglass, also known as Horseman, keeper of the sacred white buffalo calf pipe, brought to the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. We were also called the Great Sioux Nation in recent history, but have been known in ancient history as the Kanupa Oyate, the people of the pipe. The pipe was brought to our people by the white buffalo calf woman 19 generations ago. I greet you on behalf of the Buffalo people, the first people, the original people. We come from the heart of everything that is, the sacred Paha Sapa, known to the occupiers of our sacred land as the Black Hills of South Dakota. We are the watchers. We are the witnesses. We see what has gone before, and we see what happens now at this dangerous moment in human history. We see what's going to happen, what surely will happen, unless we come together, we, the people of all nations, to restore peace, harmony, and balance to the earth, our mother. I honor your sacredness, your humanness, and I ask you to honor mine. It's good that we meet at this crucial time, this sacred time, this crossroads in human and in Earth Mother's history. Yes, it is good. When I was 12 years old, words of our ancient prophecies were instilled in me by the spiritual elders of that time. Those prophecies concerned drastic changes that would come to all life upon Mother Earth. These changes are here with us today. Our prophecies tell us we are at a crossroads. We face chaos, disaster, and the endless tears from our relatives' eyes. Or we can unite spiritually in peace and in harmony. It's time to bring the message of the urgent need for peace, of creating an energy shift throughout the entire world. As keeper of the sacred pipe bundle, I ask for your prayers for global healing. Our Mother Earth is suffering. Her wonderful gifts, the water, the trees, the air, are being abused. Her children, the two-legged, the four-legged, those who swim, crawl, and fly, are being annihilated. We see such atrocities occurring everywhere. Our relatives, the animal nations, reflect our own well-being. The buffalo, wolf, salmon, bear, caribou, eagle, dolphin, and many other sacred relatives in this fragile ecosystem are in danger and are suffering. We, the indigenous nations, see what our brother animal nations are going through, since we are all connected. We are all one. What happens to them happens to us. They need our help. Our voices must be heard. This new millennium will usher in an age of harmony, or it will bring the end of life as we know it. Starvation, war, and toxic waste have been the hallmark of the great myth of progress and development that has ruled the last millennium. To our people, as caretakers of the heart of Mother Earth, falls the responsibility of turning back the powers of destruction. We have come to a time and a place of great urgency. The fate of future generations rests in our hands. We must understand the two ways we are free to follow as we choose: the positive way or the negative way, the spiritual way or the material way. It's our own choice, each of ours and all of ours. You yourself are the ones who must decide. You alone and only you can make this crucial choice. Whatever you decide is what will be: to walk in honor or to dishonor your relatives. You cannot escape the consequences of your own decisions. On your decision, on your own personal decision, depends the fate of the entire world. We are the only species destroying Mother Earth. You must decide. You cannot avoid it. Each of us is put here in this time and this place to personally decide the future of humankind. Did you think that the Creator would create unnecessary people in a time of such terrible danger? My grandmother once told me to understand that every person can have a good heart, a heart big enough to change the world. She said the Great Spirit would not give us something that we could not handle. Know that you yourself are essential to this world. Believe that. Understand that the blessing and the burden of that. You yourself are desperately needed to save the soul of this world. Did you think you were put here for anything less? Our people carry a message that has been handed down to us from elder to elder through the generations, a sacred message called the way of life. It is the Great Spirit, the great enveloping mystery that has blessed us all. And each generation has an obligation to pass this message down to the next. Because our world, like the breath of life that carries it, is sacred. It must be passed down in truth. We do this in our ceremonies, in our prayers, in our prophecies, in our sacred teachings. Each generation has its special task, its instructions. Ours is a global healing through world peace and prayer. That is this generation's task. That is my task, and that, my friend, is your task too. Our instructions come from the Great Spirit and tell us to promote global healing, to teach peace and harmony to the many nations of Mother Earth, and to begin both a great healing and a great forgiving. Healing cannot begin without forgiveness. We must forgive each other, forgive our loved ones, forgive our friends, forgive our enemies, and forgive ourselves. We need to pray even for a person who has done us wrong. Forgiveness itself is powerful medicine. We need forgiveness to create peace. And so, our generation has been put here to save future generations. That's why we hold the World Peace and Prayer Day. In a prophecy, we were told we would be the key people to re-educate our relatives, teaching the medicines of balance and harmony that our Mother Earth needs to survive. That is why I say today that we are at a crossroads, each of us and all of us, understanding the positive and the negative influences that affect all life yet to come. We ourselves, you and me and all of us, must make the right decision on behalf of all future generations. We must teach all peoples that Mother Earth is not a resource, but the very source of life itself. Unless we do this, the powers of destruction will overwhelm us. But we have little time.
Those who think to win the world by conquering it. The world cannot be conquered.
What does it profit you to gain the whole world? Or violence with violence?
Do not fight against peace or anger or any of your emotions.
Your anger is yourself.
Your pain is yourself. Do not fight against them. Embrace them with great tenderness, as though you were
embracing a little baby.
nasha na tumo manatu. Tabatni. Watu chikindisin. Okumis. Tabatni wachisa pausu. Wasukatia huana. Notas nemo manantionk. Kim nuta yu cantaminok. En een meo nire wan me quantam kichia. Ka mata wanantam. Ka nagotie kokutan ninawan. Manatu. Wasukatia huana. Womanetatiu. Ka nosokomuso amoke. Ninaho kankanto chokesiche. Niayo. Tabani manatu ni wachia yem hodnoshoni. Ho. I greet you in the words of the Algonquin language, the first words spoken on this land, the words that are more than just words, but in our culture, the words are also the breath, and the breath is life. So the words represent the ecology of the land. They represent the trees, the water, the animals, the flying ones, the creepy crawling ones. And so that is our intimate connection with everything through our voice, through our breath. It is a true honor to be here today. I want to thank Ingrid and Ralph, Pastor Ralph, for inviting me here to share with you all. It's a very important time for all of us, and it's a real privilege to speak here. And I also acknowledge this land, which is just a little bit west of my traditional homeland, the Stockbridge Munsee Mohican people who are my relatives. And so I pay honor to them who've lived here for eons, who raised their families here, who sang their songs here, who built their lodges here, and studied philosophy, intellectual curiosities, and essentially dwelled here in a good way to raise their families. So I am very pleased to hear many of the topics that were spoken, and it really made me feel like home to hear the prayers, to hear the teachings about the strawberry and the three sisters, and so that was such an honor. So it's very important for me to start about how I got here. What I'm going to share with you today, the first topics are greed, suffering, love, forgiveness. Heavy stuff. In the beginning of all things, the Nipmuc people, as we are told, started out as sky beings, living in the vast universe with the Great Spirit. And from the sweat of the Great Spirit's hand, he formed a ball of water. And out of this ball of water, he wanted to give life to a being. And in that ball of water, he gave life to Mishitanopasag, the great turtle. And in this ball of water that he created for Mishitanopasag, he put food in there for the great turtle to feed on. And as the great turtle fed, she became larger and larger and larger. And in time, the back of the turtle rose above the water. And there we have our first land, which we call Turtle Island. And on the back of Mishitanopasag, you will notice on all the turtles, the main section of Mishitanopasag has 13 sections, kind of like octagons. And these 13 sections represent our calendar, the 13 moons, which represents all of our teachings, all of our philosophical understandings of the universe and everything in it. And these have been our teachings since the beginning of time. And this is where the Great Spirit has put our people, the Nipmuc, the people of the fresh water. Before contact, our homeland stretched from Natick, Massachusetts to just this border where we are now, northeastern Connecticut, northern Rhode Island, southern tip of New Hampshire, in an area approximately 2,000 square miles of our homeland where the Nipmuc people lived and raised their families and carried out life as different parts of the world was doing. Today we're down to acres. We just actually received about 20 acres of land, and so we have about 30 acres of land today. So yes, 2,000 square miles to about 30 acres of land. And this came through a lot of suffering, through a lot of pain to my ancestors. In 1675, it was really shaping this part of the world here. The colonial contact with my ancestors, where the first reservations began to pop up, which they called praying towns, where indigenous people were put in these little places and forced to pray. It was essentially pray or be shot. And they were forced to give up their teachings, their traditional ways of life, because it was a real threat to the colonial control. when people had such an intimate connection to the land. So they needed to break that. And part of doing that was introducing another way to live in these confined spaces and a new type of beliefs. But during that time, there was a great battle for this area called the King Philip's War. And my Mohican brothers and sisters were eventually pushed out where they're now in Wisconsin. But many of us still remain here today, such as myself, and other communities such as the Narragansett, the Wampanoag, the Mohegan, the Pequot. But anyway, just touching a little bit on the King Philip's War, I encourage everybody to kind of look that up. It's a lot of history there. And one of the great leaders of that battle against colonial encroachment was Mudawamp. He was one of the great leaders who fought for the freedom of Nipmuc people. And eventually he was tricked and captured just on the border of New Hampshire and taken to Boston, Boston Common, the place now where we go and have our coffee and tea and walks and all that. And he was taken there and beheaded, and his body cut in little pieces, and they stuck him throughout the town. And much like many other tribal leaders at that time. And so I reflect on that, and then moving a little further in history, my relatives who were forced in the first internment camp during that time as well, Deer Island, where hundreds of these praying town Indians, as I refer to, were put on Deer Island, where many froze and starved to death. And we do an honoring each year, and it's coming up actually in a couple of weeks, a Deer Island Memorial. Everybody's welcome to participate with that. We do a paddle out to Deer Island in commemoration of those who died out there. So just moving along a little further in history, and I'm kind of jumping through a lot. During the Revolutionary War, my great-great-great-great-grandfather joined up to fight. His name was Samson Hazard. And so, yes, I'm a son of the Revolutionary War, which is kind of ironic. And so I mention him because even going up a little further, following him, his sons, my great-great-grandfather, and all of his brothers were in the Union Army during the Civil War. And one of my great uncles was captured in the Andersonville prison and died down there. And there's a great book down in the Mashantucket Pequot Museum entitled Native Veterans from Appomattox to Connecticut. And I happened to be down there one day, and I'm looking through the book, and there's my grandfathers and all their other names. And I said, oh, this is neat. I got to have this book. And so moving further in time, and all the rest of the wars, I'm a veteran myself. I have 4 children. My oldest son, Manex, he's currently in Japan right now. He's in the Marines. And so I bring all that up to kind of put in context about I guess you could say, the dichotomy of where the indigenous people were and how they continued on to try to support and defend and fight for this country, because we truly love this land, and it's a part of our soul and our spirit. And so during that Civil War time, I would just say all the men, much like throughout the East, a lot of the men were gone. So this is when we have a lot of the women getting the different types of jobs and work that they were able to get into, because all the men were either killed or off fighting in the Civil War. And so, and during that time, unfortunately, my relatives who were, my great-grandmother who was living in a Nipmuc community called Wabaquasset, that's just over the border of Webster where I live now. That was one of the tribal communities. And so while the men were gone, her kids were all taken and put in boarding schools, and her land was confiscated. She had about 45 acres. And so actually my grandfather's oldest brother it was 3 generations of children taken and put in these industrial schools. My grandfather's oldest brother, Arthur, was the last child. He was born in 1897 to be taken and put in boarding school, and didn't see his siblings until he was at 18. And so that's how I got here. I'm a product of all this. And growing up, first part of my life was living in Western Mass. And coming into all this generational trauma and the things that my ancestors have dealt with. And I don't want to spend too much time on this side, but it's a really important one, because I think about my mom's brother, they're all farmers and raised tobacco, and the 3 sisters and so on. They didn't go to school during that time because they were all working and farming and so on. But I recall he would say this when he was a little inebriated. He would talk about the time when he finally did go to school at the age of 12. And he remembers he went, and the schools back then were just one house. And he remembers going there, and the teacher introduced him and said, "This is Benjamin, and he's a Native American," or they said Indian back then. And when they said that, he said he had to go to the bathroom, and there was an outhouse, and he went and ran home, because now he's been identified as an Indian. And he was scared, because he knows what was done to Indian people back then. And so it really pleases me to be speaking here in the church about indigenous culture. Again, more irony. So it's just not something you would have seen 100 years ago. And that's something that we really need to kind of absorb about all of our progress as human beings and coming to understand when we talk about healing, forgiveness, and that reciprocity of open our minds. And so I grew up in that kind of world of much like I mentioned my uncle, of feeling like I got to lay low, I got to be careful about who I am and where I go and what I say and what I do. And it was a scary time for me growing up. I grew up in the 80s. I'm not as young as I look. Clean living. So growing up in the 80s, it was difficult. And my brother, we all had these horrible nicknames. And I talk about my childhood. It was a really bad childhood because we were always picked on by the other kids. My oldest brother was called Injun Joe. And if some of you folks remember the movie Tom Sawyer, who Injun Joe, he was the really bad guy and the scary one. So these are the kind of things that we had to deal with. So I immediately, get some water here. So as a teenager, I was really lost, and I was really a sad child. And my grandfather at the time, they were still living in the woods, and my mom had moved to the city. So we were like first generation city kids too. We didn't know what was going on. And I remember my grandpa trying to touch base with me, and I was just really like not hearing it at the time. So I started drinking a lot. And doing drugs and all this other crazy stuff. And I was like, yeah, oh man, I finally found something. I was relaxed, and now I felt like I belonged, and I could really kind of relate to people around me. I finally felt that I could. And that quickly went downhill. Man, did that go downhill fast. And then I just couldn't function without alcohol. At a young age, at 16, 17, 18. And without going into too much further, by the time I was 21 years old, I was nearly killing myself from alcohol, nearly drinking myself to death. And I tell this story all the time. When I was about 21, I was 21 years old, and I was in the hospital, IV, alcohol poisoning. And I was always a very curious kid. I always loved to learn, but of course, alcohol was impeding any type of future I could have in terms of education or anything like that. So I recall watching in the hospital, they had the little TVs up there, and of all shows they had on PBS, and they were talking about Christopher Columbus. Yeah. And that was a really pivotal moment. I'm glad that was there. So the narrator's talking about Christopher Columbus and how he brought alcohol to the indigenous people and summarily robbed them of their land and just caused mass devastation. This rum that they were bringing them by the barrel load, there were deeds being signed, Indians were given this, and they were essentially killing themselves over this alcohol. We were not used to it. We were not prepared. Our bodies could not function with this toxin that they were bringing across the ocean. And when I watched that, something changed in me. And I can't tell you what it was. I felt this shiver go up my spine. I felt this glow all over me. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh. It was all happening at once. It was just really a dynamic feeling I was having. And I never drank again after that day. And that was 29 years ago. And I walked out of the hospital scratching my head and said, what the blank has been going on here? If I'm the indigenous person, why am I feeling like I'm left out? Why am I feeling like I don't belong? And I started on the mission of really starting to learn and really dive into the traditions and the culture and the teachings of my people. And it led me to being here with you today. I've traveled, I've written 3 books. I've traveled the world. I have 4 children, as I mentioned earlier. My youngest one is sitting right there, is my little man. Little man, get it? And my 3 older sons who are not here today, as I mentioned, my oldest one is in Japan. But when they were young boys, we essentially traveled across the United States and Canada with my big drum group. We were known as the Quabbin Lake Singers. And I began sharing the culture and learning a lot myself. And eventually I got into writing, and I was really blessed with that ability because my second book was a national award winner. And I went down to Albuquerque, New Mexico to receive that award. And I've traveled essentially all over U.S., Canada, and many parts of Europe, including my fascinating visit in Iceland and Greenland and Sweden and Ireland. And so it's been a journey. And one of the most important things I do when I talk to youth, I'm also a teacher as well, I work in schools. One of the most important things I tell young people is you don't need drugs and alcohol to have a good time, because I've done all those things free from that crap. Excuse my language. Where is Jesus at? Oh, he's everywhere. I forgot. Oh, yeah. So that is a big part of my mission in life, is to educate young people about the prevention of alcohol, drugs, and other things that they're coming out with to harm our spirit. And so I do a lot of teaching on that. And so when we think about forgiveness and understanding, and that's a big, and I was talking to somebody before we started, and I've heard that mentioned to me before through my travels, and it was said that how can you forgive? How is it possible to forgive what Europeans have done to your ancestors, and how are you able to function? It's hard. But seriously, when I first got sober some 29 years ago, I was, and I believe everybody, you have your stage in time of learning and processes. And that's important to understand. Because when I was that age, and I started traveling with my kids, I was very I don't want to say militant because I wasn't really violent, but I was very radical in terms of getting the message out there. I didn't mind going up to protect Mount Wachusett and doing all these sit-ins and different things like that. And I was a very angry person, because the more I read, the more I got mad because of learning how your land was stolen and all the violations of laws and so on. But I began, even though I was on that right path of healing my body and my spirit, I was getting sick inside with the anger, almost hate. And it was eating me up inside. And so I needed to make another change, forgiveness. And the forgiveness is not for them, it's for me. And that's what I realized. And after talking to my elders, they helped me with that. And this brings us to another topic about when you start going inside the traditional indigenous values. It's the giveaway. And when things are not going right and you're having a troubled heart, you do this, what we call the giveaway. You give away part of something that's valuable to you, whether it's a material or it's your time. And so these are important things about healing. And another beautiful experience I had in terms of forgiveness is that when I was able to travel, for example, to Iceland and talk to these people, and I was really pleased that they knew more about Native Americans here than most Americans do. And this is why I go so many places and travel and share to get this curriculum and get this understanding out there. But they were very wonderful people, in Iceland. And one of the things you begin to learn, regardless of what people look like on the outside, we're all on the inside right here. Can anybody tell me what that sounds like? And so this is where we are to connect, to heal. Because on the inside, we're all doing this. And when that forgiveness comes, it really has a fundamental change in your spirit, in your heart. And as I said, I was very blessed to be able to have the life that I've had thus far, and being able to do all the wonderful things. If anybody out here who's struggling with an addiction or knows somebody, there is hope, there is way. I'm 52 years old and I just started surfing this year, so go figure. And this is what happens when you try to live a healthy lifestyle and do all the right things. Things are going to happen, no doubt. I've gone through many different things through those years, but you don't have to do it with a drink or a drug. And that's the most beautiful thing. And once you get to know me, you see how a little crazy I am. And then you'll see, gee whiz, we don't need drugs. Look at this, let's hang around this guy for a while, you know. He knows how to. The high, the true high is right there, because you can't get it. It's something to always try to feel right here. It's the moment that's always in constant the happening, as it were. And so I would just like to take this moment. I'm going to share another song later, but I think it's appropriate right now to share a song. So before I close with this first section, I'm going to be speaking a couple more times. You get more of me. As far as forgiveness, I want that to kind of resonate, is that forgiveness is for you. It might not sound like it at the time, but believe me, it's when you're forgiving and letting it go, it's like you're carrying around this big bag of stuff and just let it go. And now, wow, look how light I am. That's letting go of that anger. And then that's where love can manifest, when you let that go, you know. And the suffering part of that is just is freeing, you know. And we talk about growth. There's always pain with growth. Well, there is, but you know, and I truly believe that we're all here to help each other, you know. And it doesn't have to be so painful, because we're here to help each other out. And Chief Orwell Looking Horse, as I was telling somebody earlier, he's a good friend of my older brother Troy. And when they had the Peace Pagoda out, and anybody was there at that ceremony, the Blue Star out in the horse farm, when they planted the peace pole there some years ago. But his words are very, very relevant and very powerful. And so with that, I'll be speaking a little bit more on some other topics, and I really thank you for listening. Thank you.
Ingrid asked me to lead you all in a simple melody based on Navajo saying, "Walk in beauty." I did just a little bit of research on the saying itself. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Basically, it's when we encounter fear, we learn to move beyond fear, because fear inhibits growth. And we're not going to conquer that. There's always going to be fear around, but we learn to go beyond it to joy, happiness, confidence, and peace. And so this melody is, it's a melody by, I think it's by John Cooligan. So the words are, "Now I walk in beauty, beauty is before me, beauty is behind me, above and below me." So let's do a little, I'll sing a little bit, and you respond. Hopefully I'll teach it to you, and we'll sing it a few times. It goes. Now I walk in beauty. Now I walk in beauty. Beauty is before me. Beauty is before me. behind me. Beauty is behind me. Above and below me. Above and below me. Now I walk in beauty. Now I walk in beauty. Beauty is before me. Beauty is before me. Beauty is behind me. Beauty is behind me. Above and below me. Above and below me. Together. Now I walk in beauty. Beauty is before me. Beauty is behind me. Above and below me. Now I walk in beauty. Beauty is before me. Beauty is behind me. Above and below me. Now I walk in beauty. Beauty is before me. Beauty is behind me. Above and below me.
Bueno, yane, 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 yo ho. In our traditional culture, when there is two tribes feuding, and they did from time to time, much different than the European style of warfare. However, whenever there was conflict between two communities, you wouldn't see any men around in terms of how to resolve it. It would be the women from both communities would meet and talk and discuss. They would be the first to try to resolve it, to come to a reconciliation, some kind of peace and form. Because our ancestors knew men weren't very good at that. They weren't humble enough, and they didn't have that kind of harmony and balance. You know, we hear a lot about harmony and balance, that term, we try to get harmony and balance, but let's just kind of look at what that really means, balance. Balance is like me standing here. I'm able to balance my body. Balance is when two forces, two elements come together, and each of them are giving up a little bit of themselves. So you have to give up something to have that balance. You have to let go of a part of you, and you have to have that trust. And women are a lot better than doing that than men, historically. For example, and again, it's very different than Eurocentric types, because when the colonials came here, they had this very, robust work ethic, very, very austere. You work sun up to sundown. If you were idleness, and the devil's he's gonna get you. He's watching. You better keep moving. So, the native person, average work day was probably 4 hours. But of course, the women's always worked harder. They worked about 6 to 7 hours a day. That's it. And so we were accused of being too leisure and idle and all that. But again, everything was done in that amount of time. It wasn't about, again, that type of environment. And so women have historically had that great strength. And as the more I became to understand my ancestors and culture throughout my young years growing up and being around my community, and when we see this juxtaposition of Western thought towards women, it really boggles the mind. And it also goes for like people of different sexual identities and genders. These were not things that were even a second thought in indigenous communities. We don't care. What do we care? And in fact, we had a term for people with different sexual identities that were called the two-spirit. And they were kind of looked up to at times because they carried both spirits. And so that's pretty neat if you're carrying two spirits, right? So these were something that were very kind of like looked upon with reverence, or sometimes not even really, it wasn't a big deal, as I said. And so when you think about indigenous culture here, that was one of the things that the colonials noticed right away, how high they put up their women and so on. And so when we talk about women's suffrage and women's rights movements, they became more free as soon as they got here in terms of all the different things. And they were watching how the indigenous women, they could divorce and they could move about freely, they could remarry, they could own property, and all these things that European women weren't allowed to do. And they could speak amongst men. And, but unfortunately, a lot of that didn't get passed on through the writings. Like some of the great chiefs down in Massasoit's niece there. I can't recall her name now, but it'll come to me. But there are many women chiefs, or sometimes they call them squaw sachems, and I'm not sure if that was a proper term, but that was a term that was used, and some of the relatives still use that today. And so when we think about the femininity, again, and that balance that we have to find, and we do rely on our feminine side. We all have it. We all have a feminine and a masculine side. And and again, in a world that's focused on strength and power, but just think about this for a second, is that you only get to experience life through the most delicate things. Your fingertips, your eyes, your ears, your nose. These are the most delicate systems in your body. And they get thrown off, and you'll get singing in the ears, or you can get glaucoma, or you can get sensory deprivation. Many of us experience these. So these are very sensitive things. And so when we think about the feminine and the sensitivity of that delicateness, that power that it has to give life, to make you experience life, those are things that we need to keep in mind, that the most delicate things allow you to experience life. And these are the things that our ancestors had recognized with women. And again, this was not something that was a thought of contemplation, because this was the way things were in our culture, in our communities. The women were the ones who picked the chief. Although there were no women chiefs, they picked them in some communities. So they got to say who was going to be chief, and I'm sure they were, elbowing them, and this is what you're going to do if you want to let him marry so-and-so, and so that's how it was. But it wasn't an imbalance, and again, it wasn't an imbalance where men were made to feel like they didn't count or didn't matter. And again, there was that balance, because they knew they had certain duties that they had to do as well. And again, if women couldn't reconcile these differences that they had with their communities, then the men would come in and have to do what they had to do. And we can tell, regardless of if a battle broke out, because one of the interesting things that Europeans notice about indigenous style warfare is that sometimes nobody would even die, or there'll be 1 or 2 casualties, because it wasn't about wiping out your enemy. It's about kind of teaching them a lesson, letting them know yeah, we're bad over here. It wasn't about killing everybody, because that just didn't make sense. Balance. They're a part of this world too. And so the woman and their connection to the earth is something that we have to reflect on and learn from, Mother Earth and woman. And that's why we say she, and the turtle, Mishitanopasad, is of the feminine, of that power. Mother Earth is our home. And we need to remember that she is a living being. And how we act and how we behave and the things that we do reflects her. And as some of my elders talk about women, again, the women, they are the first environment. And so, as you see the way our women have been treated, it's a kind of a reflection of how the earth has been treated. And it kind of goes, unfortunately, in that same direction. Because look at these trees, they can't fight back, I can kill them. Look at those animals, I got a big strong gun, I can shoot them. Look at these things, I can swat them and I can kill bees and I got all this strength. And with all that strength, you're killing yourself. Because you think because they're feminine or delicate, you could have a power over them. But you don't. It's a lie. You're actually harming yourself. And so we need to reflect on that. When we see a butterfly or these bees or things that we think are harmless or can't defend themselves, that they are a part of that creation. They are a part of us. The important work that we're seeing going on now, whether it was Standing Rock a few years ago, the climate march of our youth, they understand. They get it. They want to have a future. I want to have a future for my little man over there, and my other boys are already in their 20s, but, and what kind of world are we going to leave for them? We talk about the 7 generations. And it's a great story by my Passamaquoddy brother about our birch bark canoes. When we build a birch bark canoe, this first generation, say me for example, I start working on that. And then the next generation will come and start working on it. It takes 7 generations to make one birch bark canoe. So me working on it today, I'll never see it. I'll never get to ride in that canoe down the Chicopee or the Connecticut River or the Merrimack, but my great-grandchildren will. And that's who I'm doing it for. I have to keep that in mind. I don't need to, it's for them. And that's what you call the sacrifice, that balance, that giving, that sharing. And our feminine side teaches us that. And something I wanted to touch on as well too is when we look out in the schools and the university, when I go out and teach about that balance, it's something that we all need to reflect on. When I was a kid growing up in the 80s, but I'll go a little bit further back in my mother's time of an indigenous person, interracial marriage, for example, was against the law. There was segregation, Jim Crow laws, all these different things that keep people of color apart. So when I go to schools now, I'm seeing people from all walks of life. At the school where I work, I have students from Africa, the Middle East, South America, different parts of Europe. And all these kids, they're in dorms together, they're laughing, they get it. But our generation of my age and so on, the curriculum and the academia doesn't reflect the diversity in our schools, in our world. They're way behind. They're behind the curve, as it were. So when you see the youth out there in the climate march of all different backgrounds coming, they're not fighting over race and identity. They're fighting over the planet. They just want to breathe. They just want to live. They know it's silly to argue over somebody's skin color. It's ridiculous. Absolutely absurd. But people still are caught up in that, Again, we're connecting with the heart. If people want to judge from color, then they're just a sad part of evolution because it's really absurd. But our kids, as I said, of all walks of life. And so when I look at that, whether I'm at university or in school, it touches my heart. Despite all the horrible things that are going on, you see a change. We see this, And again, from an indigenous point of view, we went through a genocide. We're still on occupied lands. While others may be lamenting certain things, we're still like, wow, we're just still like dusting off, clearing the fog from our experience. There were over almost 500,000 of my people. Now we're about 3,000. So we look at these numbers. And we still have youth throughout tribal reservations dying at terrible numbers from alcohol and drug abuse that are still suffering from these ills, from a loss of identity, from a loss of culture, from a loss of self. And so the planet, the woman, we all need to come together to kind of bring this healing about. And I like through my writings there, and I have some books there that if you're willing to purchase. Folks, don't stop waving money at me right now. I'll be there in a little bit. Again, through my travels, I've met so many people who are like, they understand. But I want to reach the people who have doubts, who have these certain hang-ups, as it were. And it's not to persuade them or force them, just to kind of let them be an observer. And that's the same way I write. I let you just watch. Just watch what happens when certain things come together, and then you can decide how you feel about it. And I think that's important because people like to think, well, what's in it for me? What's in diversity for me? What do I get out of diversity? You get to live on a planet where there's peace. Your children, they're going to be sitting in classrooms with people from different walks of life. Your kid doesn't have to go to school and think, well, those people, they're not right. That's what you get out of it. You get to be part of something bigger than judging people by the way they look or how they feel. So that's what's in it for you. Protecting Mother Earth, what's in it for me? Kind of the same thing. You get to breathe, you get to live. And one of the things people talk about, the naysayers of the climate movement and global warming, there is technology. There's solar, there's wind, there's many things to propel our instruments of technology that we don't have to use these fossil fuels. And like my ancestors say, that's why the Great Spirit put them way down there, because they weren't supposed to come up. And one of the most eloquent ways one of the elders talked about it is when you look at Mother Earth, when you put these holes in her, she gets sick. And it's essentially breaking off connections that she has throughout Turtle Island. These frackings and all these different drillings, it really disrupts her connection. And it's just like a human being. If you get certain holes, you get lung cancer, you start getting a disruption the way your body functions. And it's the same with Mother Earth. Those lines of connection are being cut. And she's suffering for it. But what's going to happen is, she's been around for a few billion years, and she's just going to get rid of us. She's just going to shake us off like a sickness if we don't act. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So I thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Land of our birth, we pledge to thee our love and joy in the years to be, when we have grown and take our place as men and women win our race. Teach us to rule ourselves our ways, control and clear night and day, that we may bring in faith around to bring the worthless sacrifice. Land of our birth, our faith and pride, for whose dear sake our fathers died. O motherland, we pray to thee, and heart and hand to the years to be.
Thank you. when I speak to young people, sometimes they would ask me, like I was up at speaking at Phillips Academy, Andover, wonderful students there. Anybody ever been there? It's like Hogwarts, eating in the cafeteria. Amazing place. Really bright kids. And some of the native kids there were asking me about what the future holds. And I said, I don't know. You tell me. For they are the future. When we think about prophecy, or also, I like to kind of juxtapose that with expected outcomes. As Chief Orville Lookinghorse talked about, we kind of have an idea the trajectory we're heading if we keep doing the same thing. So that means we can change it. And I like to think about atoms. Not Adam in the Bible, atoms, the other Adam. Atom our body. If you look at an atom under the microscope, you don't know if it's a particle or a wave. It keeps changing. So the future is not yet laid. That's in our belief. You know, it's from how we act today can change that, can have a profound effect on the future. And again, in indigenous culture, our sense of time, if we can use that term, time, temporal, because the spirituality is not a temporal one. There is no beginning and end. And that's important to mention because right now, for example, we have these beautiful words on the screen. We have the beautiful music. We have some of the singing and the beautiful offerings here. So all these things that you are experiencing do not come in words, in terms of line by line, up or down, side by side, right? You're not getting it line by line. It's coming to you all at once. It's hitting all your senses, your eyes, your skin, your hair, your feelings, right? So how does your self, that we call self, the I, how do you compensate for that? So this is something our indigenous people thought about long ago. Circle. And this is why we orientate ourselves in that circle, to kind of do what the universe is doing, to orientate our lives and our prayers in that circle, the beginning and the end, the beginning and the end, because they're all connected. And so we remember that in terms of that prophecy. And the way my elders teach us is that there's nothing to be afraid of, because, and there's actually, I heard I think it was a Zen quote, if you're sad, if you're worried about the end, don't. If things look bad, then it's not the end. And I think I really, that resonates with our teachings. And I really like what Orville Lookinghorse said in terms of the way we are the species. We are the only species. We're one of the last species to get here, too, on this planet. So we're not better than a bumblebee or an ant or an earthworm or a fish. They've been here a lot longer. And this is why in our motifs, in our teachings, for example, Kankantu, the crow is my spirit animal that I follow. And also Musk, the bear. And recently, it's probably the shark, because I spend a lot of time in the water, in the ocean, surfing. That was no joke. And so it's teaching me to respect the water, respecting me that delicate balance of life and death, because they're there, they're out there, and that's the chance you take when you go out there. And when you think about that, though, with every breath and every step we take is not promised to anyone. And so we're here to be free beings. And we heard some harsh things today, not only up there, but from what I told you, the history of indigenous people. But that's also only the last 500 years. And this is one of the things that is mistakenly done in terms of indigenous culture. So let's just take scientific, what they say is how long indigenous people have been here. They radiocarbon some items as up to 20,000 years. And we say, and some have found things up to 40 to 60,000 years, some of the artifacts. So we can even just take the number of 20,000 years that indigenous people have been here, thriving, living in culture, democracy, intellectual curiosities, and doing all the different things, raising their families that any other person was doing on different parts of the world. The cosmology is all over the land. And so when you look at that, so now you got another some 15,000 years of people existing here. And so has it been rough the last 500? Oh yeah, oh yeah. But I believe that as we move forward, and again, I can't emphasize how amazing this is to be here teaching, talking indigenous culture in a church. This was the place that was most forbid, the most outlawed, the most castigated of all places. And so that means the world is coming back around, that circle I talked about. And eventually it's not going to be about, again, the color of our skin, because the indigenous people who have been on the land for thousands of years are going to be the teachers, the guide, because we've had that relationship with it. It makes sense. If I come to your house or your gym or wherever your place of dwelling is, I'm not going to suddenly understand the place better than you. I'm going to have to learn from you, because that's your home, that's your dwelling. How can I teach you? You know, indigenous people are not the renters, they're the hosts. And we have to remind the government that many times over. And that's another big problem if we go back to some of the crises in our country. Number one, they're not listening to indigenous people, and number two, they don't listen to the woman. Those two fallacies have got us where we are now, but it's changing, again, by allyship, by what the youth are doing. Everywhere I go, people are interested in indigenous culture, indigenous spirituality. It was only until 1978, that's my lifetime, I was born in 1967. 1978 was when indigenous culture, the Native American Freedom of Religion Act was passed by Congress. So prior to 1978, I couldn't have these things right here without threats of going to jail or violence against the government or people. So think about that. 1978, these were outlawed by the government. That's how afraid they were of these things, the traditional drum. But they never took it away, because this is the heartbeat of the land. And so, in terms of the prophecy, I don't have a set, because it's not a set idea of what's going to happen. Because that's going to depend on us. That's going to depend on our intentions of what we do. If we blow it all up tomorrow, then the Great Spirit's going to just bring something else here and try something else out. But if we last another few thousand years, then the Creator's going to say, well done. Because whether we're here or not, it's going to go on. And I think in the Christian faith, they believe in that eternal force, right? So as indigenous culture do, like that circle, it's going on, with or without you.
Your mic just cut off.
Oh, my mic cut off.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Test, test. But you guys can hear me, right? Yeah. I think so. No.
Push the button.
Probably the battery died.
Probably the battery died.
But everybody can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
It wasn't.
Oh, okay. Let's try this. How about this one? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No? Okay, we're going to try another mic.
There you go.
One, two. Oh, thank you. Okay. So as I was saying, Mother Earth is going to go on with or without us. And maybe not this planet even. Could be something else going on. That's how our understanding of the universe goes, because again, we started as sky beings. We weren't, before this planet was even here, we were already a part of that cosmic wonder, of the beginning of all things, as we say. So it's all going to be beautiful, one way or the other. That's what I believe. And so while we're here, help each other. Because we're the most clumsiest creatures that the Great Spirit has. We're like his comic relief. He likes, he was bored, and here we are. We're fun to watch and stumble and mess things up and make messes. And so everything else in creation, the sun knows when to rise, The bear knows when to hibernate. The bee knows when to collect pollen. The ant knows when to go down. The beaver knows when to build a dam. But we don't know because we're not listening to them. And this is where our teachings come from. And one of the things I teach young people when I'm talking about drug and alcohol prevention, I talk about the bee who has this amazing job of collecting pollen and providing these. Without the bee, we don't have that. And without the earthworm making the oxygen in the worm, we don't have the ground that's capable of delivering that. And so many other animals and things that allow us, the birds, the fish. And so then I say to this young person, I says, so if you think the Great Spirit, Manitou, could make something so small and have such a great purpose that he can make you and not have any purpose, so what did you come here for? And I think that's the most fundamental and most beautiful thing of all, because we're just here to help each other and love and learn, because everything else has already been provided. We just have to pay attention to the trees, to the water. Isn't that amazing? You know, you got the maples coming out, we have all the fruits, all the animals, they're all right here. Another important thing, well, somebody once asked me, well, Spotted Crow, then how do you justify when you go hunting, you got to shoot that animal? I said, well, that's a good question. I said, well, that's when ceremony comes in. When we take a life of another thing, we stop a heart from beating from another creature to feed our families. We take our time. You sit down beside that animal and you ask for forgiveness. And we put that sacred herb we call kinnikinnick, tobacco, down. And you make your intentions clear. And you say to that animal, you know, thank you for sharing your life with me, for my family can eat. And then one day when my time comes, I'm going to share my body with this earth. And you understand that circle. And by doing that, you are connecting yourself and your actions to that action of taking a life. It slows you down and not become like some senseless killing. And it makes you aware of what you've done. And it makes you more humble. Because without that animal sacrifice, you don't get to be here. And you keep that in mind. And so, at this time, I'm going to offer a healing song. It's going to be in the Nipmuc language. And before I do that, I just want to truly thank you all for being a part of this endeavor, a part of this movement, a part of this way of life. It's a real honor to have it and be here and just have fun to be a part of it and to share and to teach and to be that vessel as we talked about. And so with that, I'm going to share the Nipmuc healing song. Once again, I want to thank Ralph and Ingrid for inviting me here. And her and I talked for about a month or so to make this happen and to bring me here. So I was really delighted and, putting me up for the night and making my 2-hour trip to the Berkshires comfortable and happy. So I really appreciate that for having my family here and so on. And again, I have some, not too many books for sale, but I have some back there. And if you'd like to indulge in that. And just remember, by purchasing one book, it helped me go back to school. But if you buy 2 books, I don't have to go back to school. So, once again, I truly thank you all for your time, of spending your time with me, your precious day on this Sunday. I thank you so much. The Botany.
On behalf of the congregation, this is the traditional offering of sweetgrass to those who bring us wisdom and healing, and thank you with all of our blessing. And we will look for you. We will let you leave first so folks can look for you there and say thank you appropriately. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now, I understand we are close to the end of time, and I too am time sensitive, so I promise 10 minutes probably, okay? So, but we can't not do this part because we have talked about balance and the importance of reciprocity, right? So, one of the things, if I may speak for my culture, is that we tend to take a lot, more than we need, probably, and don't always do that thanksgiving and giving back. I speak for my culture. The African culture, what I can see is that great balance of the joy of giving, and that's what we're going to do right now, is the joy of giving, and our African sisters and brothers are going to model that for us. Some complicated instructions, but you will remember. If this is not your congregation, then make sure that your gift to your congregation gets to the appropriate persons. It doesn't come to us. Into the bowl will come all gifts for First United Methodist Church and the wonderful ministry that happens here. I will just say 2 things. We get to have incredible worship like this. We have people coming through our doors constantly. And yesterday there was a funeral here for someone not terribly well known, but this congregation provided everything that the family needed. So gifts to First United Methodist Church come right here. Into the blanket, which is the traditional powwow way of giving, are going to be gifts for 3 indigenous groups. The Nipmuc, first of all, whose representative was here today. The Stockbridge Mohican Band that Larry talked about, who were forced out of their homelands and who have been trying to reconnect, and sacred remains, their work is very important to reconnect them with the land here. So Mohicans, Nipmuc. The third group that's going to benefit from your gift giving to the blanket is the North American Indian Council of Boston, which does civil rights work and works in impoverished places for indigenous communities in Boston. Those are all 3 worthwhile things to give to. So we invite your generous giving here. If you didn't bring enough money with you, then come back or mail it in, because we want to give back and have some kind of balance for what has been taken from indigenous persons. Our African brothers and sisters will lead us. When you come up, it gets better. You put your gift in here, our church, the 3 indigenous communities, and then you come up here and you take something from Mother Earth's garden, take it home with you and eat it and enjoy it reverently. If there are prayers that you heard today that were on the screen and you go, gosh, I wish I could say that prayer again or put it on my refrigerator or whatever, all of the prayers are right here. You can take that as a gift after you have partaken of Mother Earth. And then just to keep the traffic flowing, come on around here and exit that way, okay? So, our African sisters and brothers, we need you to get us moving.
Thank you.
Oh
promised you 10 minutes. We are skipping to the end and doing a closing hymn. We will do our Buddhist piece at another ceremony. So, blessing upon blessing is already ours. May we go in peace and give thanks to the Creator, the creation, and to one another. May we share that love and peace. Amen.
Thanks, everyone.